Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Mechanical Anime Reviews podcast. I am Scott, and I run the blog Mechanical Anime Reviews, and it's nice to have you today. Today, I wanted to talk about a really interesting topic that is near and dear to my heart. And that is the topic of mecha and people. You know, the people that are like, oh, Evangelion is so different because it's actually about the people instead of mecha. Well, it goes a little more complicated than that, honestly. This podcast will be probably a little overly philosophical in some ways, but I thought that would be kind of fun thing to do. And yeah, and that's how it's going to go. So, how I want to look at this is I want to think about why pilots are usually 16 years old, why they're usually thrown into a mecha, and that's just a normal thing, right? Well, most of the time, unless you're Die Guard, where you have like 22 or 20-year-olds piloting mecha. But generally, this is the way I think about it. Think about like American teenagers. They learn to drive around 16 years old. They go into their driving schools and they learn how to drive a car, and like their first sense of agency. And this is not really the perfect example, honestly, because well, I know a lot of people who are Americans who don't drive around 16 or older. Some online, some in real life. That's just real life thing that happens, and that's fine. But I'm using that stereotype today because it's the easiest way to think about this. So, what do you think about a car? What do you think about when you have access to a car? What is first thing that a 16-year-old thinks about? And they think about, well, freedom. I can go anywhere I want to. I have that agency. I could go to that random fast food restaurant. I could go to a movie theater. I could go to my job. I could drive to work. I could drive to school. All that kind of thing. That's the general way that I think about it. And generally, when you think about replacing a car with a robot, well, a person without a robot in a mecha usually is fodder for being squished very quickly. So when you have that robot, when you're given that mech, then you have that agency to actually, well, one thing, you can squish people, you can fight for your own rights, you can fight for a cause, you can do all that. And I think that's kind of like where this is going, because you suddenly have access to a world of things that you haven't had before. And that's kind of amazing, right? Like, a lot of mecha series don't really cover people that are older because they've had this and they know what real life experiences are. 16-year-olds haven't had that yet. They don't know what the limits of freedom are, which is what I think about. Once again, and the two examples that I could think about were like, well, there's an antagonist in Zeta Gundam named Jared, and he doesn't know how to drive or pilot a mecha in space because he's from Earth. But somehow, because he's a Titan, like the highest grade of the Earth Federation at this moment, he has that right, he has that privilege. And yet, somehow, he messed it up, he crashed into places, he's driven seemingly drunk, he's destroyed buildings, he's probably killed people that he hasn't noticed, and he hasn't really had to think about it because he has his agency just given to him. And that's kind of a natural thing, right? Well, I guess that's kind of similar the oppression in Zeta Gundam, because Titans have more control than they have, or should have, because they're monsters. They're fascist people, they want control over everything, and that's just the way it is. So Jared is an example of like that over agency of going too far, which is why the heroes are fighting against him. Another example is one reading of Evangelion, so we're going back there again, is Shinji Ikari. And one thing he's suffering over is like the agency of driving or piloting an Evangelion unit. So yeah, first episode conflict, you better get in the pilot or seat, unless you want Ray to do it. Who's in a hospital stretcher or her bed thing, they roll right next to the Ava unit. And that's kind of like one of the things, like, does piloting an Ava actually give him that right, that agency? Should he have it? And that's one, like, of many thousands of readings. because he never feels like he's in control, because, like, Ava is a pressure box situation where everything goes wrong. Does really having a giant robot or robot really matter in that situation? And kind of yes, kind of no. Depends on your situation there. And he, and there's always different models of those, right? So when you have a robot, you can do something. You can attack, you can fight, you can win, or you can die. That's just the way it is. You have agency to do all of those things whenever you want to, unless you're part of a military organization. And when we talk about like better robots, like the Gundam units versus like the Zaku's or the GMs or things, like better robots are like people driving more expensive cars and then asking you to drive and race against them in the next green light at one of those stations, you know? Like, so imagine if you have like somebody competing with you. They have a Lamborghini and you have a similar level car. That means you are the elite. You can do whatever you want, and you could drive just as fast as everyone else. Maybe slightly slower, maybe slightly faster. It's hard to know, really. But if you are a Mook unit, you have a GM, you have a Zaku against a Gundam. Well, and you have in this comparison, you have like a Honda Civic against a Lamborghini. It's obviously that you're going to lose. And that's kind of like the levels of units where some mass-produced units, some more expensive, more elite units. That's just the way it is. There is some caveats to that, like what about skill? You have the best pilots are going to pilot like a Mook unit, like GM or Zaku or Leo or whatever, and they could probably win against most experimental units because they have that capability, that experience, and everything else because they know all the tricks of the trade, right? And that's the difference between aces and normal people. Aces just can do everything that they want to do. So general, aces have more impact on the battlefield than normal people. Aces and elite units have way more impact than aces and normal units. So like that's generally like the agency there. Like some have better extensions of their agency than others. I like that fact, honestly. And with that, we can go to realm of real or super robot once again, because there are differences. If in this comparison, like if you have a real robot or you drive your car and you go through different curves or sections or go straight through other cars, you're probably going to die. There are real limitations in these scenarios where the parts matter. Like not even your skill is going to work when you pilot or drive right through other cars, through intersections, through curves, through stone walls. No matter what, you're probably going to get messed up or at least injured and probably put out for a long time. Super robots are so much different than that. Like the hardware or the mechanics of the car don't really matter. As long as you exert your own will into the car, you can do whatever you want. As long as enough will and spirit and power and passion, then you can do everything. And that's kind of the appeal of that. So, so in summary, when you think about Mecha, think about a 16-year-old learning how to drive for the first time and driving a car, because a robot cannot pilot itself most of the time. Like 90% of the time they can't, unless they're from Brave series or Transformers or from Gargantia. They can't do it. But so whatever a pilot does matters because of that. Yeah, Mecha can't do what they want. It has to be the pilot who does it, and that's where character development comes from. That's where experience comes from. That's where real life trauma comes from. That's where exerting your will and passion comes from. It has to be from the pilot, not from the robot itself. And with that, we can go into some of the series I've been watching recently. So I have been watching 3 mecha anime recently. They are 2 Tomino anime, Xabungle, Gundam Zeta, and then I have been watching Macross 7. So, yay! The first one I'm going to talk about is Macross 7, and that's been the most interesting one so far. So, 13 episodes in, a lot of time was spent developing the fire bombers, on their Macross 7 spaceship. So they've been developing their own little music career. They've been getting interrupted by space aliens that want to capture their spirita or their song energy and memories. Basically, like, whole entire personality. Despite that, the Firebombers have been building some kind of rock career. They have a record deal. They've been getting bigger and bigger concerts from different locations. And that's kind of been the fun of it, despite the alien invasion. But now, like, the Gipple and her alien armada, well, I'm not sure it's her, but I'm going to go with A. A and their alien armada have been starting to capture people. The Macross 7 has been separated from the Macross 7 fleet. So there's the trauma of the Firebombers and the Mayor Malaya trying to actually save the city while the military is trying to figure out what's going on and where they went. And so my Rockman story has been interrupted by space aliens once again because they decided they really wanted to be the focus. So yeah, that's how it's been going, and I've actually been enjoying it a lot. It's very 90s, very rock band, very fun. Characters are very likable despite the difference they have with each other, and just a fun time all around, honestly. Highly recommend it if you get a chance. Well, at least out of episode 13 right now. Next one is Xabungle. I'm 11 episodes into that, and finally we're digging into a lot more of the story, at least a little bit of it. So we know that there's the innocents out there. It called the innocents because they are innocent people. They have nothing to do with fighting in war or anything. And then you have, like, the generic bad guy named Big Man, and he's leading or trying to take over the desert and all the claims of it. And then you have the Xabungle crew of Jiren and the Iron Guard and all those fun people. And it's very interesting watching them play off of each other. They still don't know how they're going to control everything, or at least get their own independence and how to survive the situation at hand. There's also a major theme of revenge. Like, Jiren is still going after people who killed his parents. The guy's name actually Timp. And he's going against rules of that world. In the world of Xabungle, you can only get revenge up to 3 days after something has happened. Otherwise, you need to move on, carry on with what you're doing, the whole shebang. But Jiren has broken that rule. He's gone on beyond a week now. Probably longer, but he's still obsessed and wants to get his revenge. So that adds a little more depth to what's going on than just, people are fighting in the desert, they holding their claims. Jiren is actually trying to get revenge. And people make fun of him for it. And on the other hand, you have Elchi Cargo, the one who's leading his group, whose father was just killed, but she doesn't want revenge. So they're very simple ideas, but they're simple ideas that can play off in very interesting ways. And let's mention a lot of more aesthetics of the universe. So every character is a dork. And I mean that, in a Looney Tunes sort of fashion. Even Timp, the scary bad guy that Jiren is escaping, he has plenty of times where he's ran right through, or fell off cliffs and ran right into his mecha unit, just the most cartoony way possible. And it's really hilarious. And it really rings home that despite the revenge story, there's a lot of comedy that Tomie likes to explore and think about too. And I'm kind of enjoying that fact too. And there's also the creative number of units. The Xabungle itself is a blue Gundam unit. It's not that interesting, but you have plenty of units, one with the gun turrets on top of his head, and so many other units like that. Even the Iron Guard unit. It's a giant land ship, but it can turn into a giant robot. It's really cool. Very Macross-like, except it's on land. But, so yeah, this is not really the most amazing series ever, but I've been following it week to week for a while, and if you like Tomie, you probably like this one. If you're not, then, no, that's just what it is, I guess. And the last one I want to talk about is Zeta Gundam. once again, another Tomino thing, and follows the original Gundam 0079, 7 years after that show ended, even timeline-wise and, in-universe-wise, too. Like, they really actually put it together 7 years after. And that's I've been watching that one a lot faster than the other two, and for a lot of my own reasons, honestly. And I kind of been really digging it once again. Like, I watched it first time, and I already liked it, but there's something else about watching it so far away from when you originally did, because you catch a lot more things. Like, there's a major, like I mentioned kind of earlier, like Zeta Gundam is currently Earth against the Titans. So basically, the AUG Anti-Union Guard or something, against the oppressive fascist Titans. And there's a lot of major things going on. Like, Camille's our protagonist. He's a girl's name, and through a lot of angsty circumstances, he shows up. He gets on the crew of the Argama, and he meets Lieutenant Quattro, who is Char Aznavour, if you know who he is from the original series. And there's a lot of, big emotional things. There's a lot of angst. And that's kind of to the series' advantage, honestly, because this is a series about people not wanting to be where they are. You see a lot of members of the original cast are here, and they aren't where you think they would be. So Char Aznavour and Amuro Ray, they're the main pilots for the original series, for example. And so you have Char Aznavour, who is not any leader at all. He's just a pilot. Isn't that interesting? And then Amuro Ray, who's less than that. He's locked down in prison. He's the guy who won against the Zeon, and he's locked in prison. And that's kind of what makes Zeta Gundam much more mature than the original series. Not because you have Camille going through and seeing what these other two have done after they won their war, after they become famous, after all of that, but because these are adults with adult problems, not having the success that they wanted, or the life that they wanted, after everything else. They're weighed down by gravity, as Aries says. And there's a lot of emotional incidents. There's a lot of repeated moments that Amuro and Char faced, that Camille is facing now, but now he has guidance. Now he has a way to go through it, because he has examples. And that's a lot more than Char and Amuro had. And that's what kind of catches me, even if, it's overly dramatic sometimes, or the line reading is bad, or the reading is bad. Overall, thematically, it is a very good series. And also, a lot of things expand off it, too. I like the mobile suit designs. I like the animation behind them. Even if mid-80s, there's so much detail put into them. I don't have the Blu-ray copy. I have a DVD copy. And yet, somehow, all of that visual art is shown in Zeta Gundam. If you watched the original series and you really liked it, then you will like Zeta Gundam too. That's recommendation from me, 100%. And with that, I would like to close Mechanical Anime Reviews, Episode 2. Robots and people are completely different things. Everything is always about people. And one major thing I want to say is Mecha March starts next month. And that should be very exciting. I kind of want to see how far this can go. And with that, find me on Twitter at MechAnimeReviews. Find my blog at MechanicalAnimeReviews.com. And I will talk to you guys in audio form next month. Goodbye.